Hello and welcome to Control Delete Tutorials. Today we're going to be looking at editable polygons or editable polygon objects, or edit poly if you like, all of which are referring to the same thing. So starting out in 3ds Max, under our Create panel, under Geometry, we have our primitive objects. So these are your very basic building block objects. If you haven't seen the intro to 3ds Max, we kind of talk about these a little bit further in depth, and you should check out that video first before moving on to this one. So whenever we create objects here, we're given a number of parameters here based on its object's length, width, and height. We can also have more or less segments, and you can see here the length segments work based off of the length, width with the width, and height with the height. And so typically whenever you start, you'll probably see your box and it'll probably look something like this, so you're not going to see any segments. So what we're able to do is add, very simply segments. So let's just say I add 5 by 5 by 5, and that gives me 5 by 5 by 5, and I can type in numbers here. If I type in 20 by 20 by 20, I'll get a box that is 20 by 20 by 20. And you can see here the max units, this grid, each grid section here is 10. So as you can see, this fits very nicely within a 20 by 20 space. But let's say you want to modify this box to do something else besides just these segments. You want to get in and start messing around with the vertices, the edges, the polygons, what have you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the Modify panel here, and we can see that this object is named Box. We can rename this. We can also add a number of modifiers, which I also cover, I believe, in another video, so like a bend modifier. And these are all fine and good, but they don't really allow us to really get in and make anything else of this box. So the way that we do that is we convert this object to what's called editable polygons. So if I right click, this brings up our quad menu, and if I go down, and this might look a little bit different on yours, I have mine customized. You'll normally see a convert to, and there will be a arrow over to the side and allow you to convert to many different things, but typically I convert to editable polygon, so I've edited my quad menu to show that. So I'm going to click convert to editable polygon, and we see now that in our modifier list, in our stack here, this is called our modifier stack. If I undo, we can see it used to say box, and if I redo, it now says editable polygon. So redo being going a step forward back to convert to editable poly, and I'll normally just call this edit poly. But our object is still named box, but the box parameters are now gone, and it's been replaced with our editable poly parameters. If I click the little plus sign here, we're going to see vertex, which if I click this, you'll see vertex. That's our vertices. Those are our points in 3D space. So if we select this, either by just clicking or doing a window selection to select a group, we can now get in and start modifying this. We can go into edge mode and start selecting the edges. So our edges are lines that are connecting to vertices. So there's a vertex here and a vertex here, and this edge is what is created there. The other thing with edges are the way they run. So if you were to say, look at this box, our edges run one of two ways. They either move in a line that follows the other polygons, so we can see that's how those work, or I can surround a polygon, so I'm holding control and clicking each one of the edges here, and that allows me to select around a polygon. But the ones that run together are known as an edge loop. So if I double click, I will select all of the edges in that edge loop. Okay, I'm going to click over on the side just to deselect. So that is our loop, and you can actually see there's a button here called loop, which if I select an edge and I click loop, it will automatically select that for me. But there's a nice little shortcut of just double clicking. And then you can see we have another button here that says ring. So what ring is selecting all of the lines that run parallel to a given edge. So if I hold shift and if I hold shift, I'll select the ring, and the ring all run parallel to one another. Or I can select an edge and just click ring, and it'll do the same thing. So that's pretty cool. It's very helpful to be able to select that way. A border, if I try to select this object right now, you'll see that there are no borders. I'm going to come back to this. Next to this we have polygon. So polygons allow me to select the individual squares that we see here. These polygons are what are known as quad polygons, meaning they're four-sided. But the thing you need to know about quad polygons is that they're actually made up of two triangles. We just don't see the edge. I'm going to go to vertex mode and show you what I mean. So if I select this vertex and I move this up, we can see that there's an edge that's being created here between this point and this point. Same idea happens. I'm going to come over to this edge and pull up. Now see, in this case the hidden edge runs along here, and we can tell because we're getting this at an angle. So all quad polygons are made up of what are called triangles. If I go to edge mode and I come down to this tool called turn, it's going to show me all those hidden edges. And those are not important for right now, but I just want you to be aware that all quads are made up of two tris. Ideally, we want to stick to four-sided polygons. At times we may have to rely on a three-sided polygon, but what we really want to try to do is not get a bunch of three-sided polygons that meet in one spot. Just to show you what I mean by that, I'm going to just for instance select all of these polygons, and I'm going to click this button collapse, which I'll explain what these all mean. But it basically takes all of these polygons and collapses them to one single vertex. And so we can see that. And so what we see, instead of having all these squares, we have a bunch of triangles that all meet in one spot. This one vertex is actually called a pole. Just like you can think of a globe having a north and south pole, where the longitude, I believe, longitude lines all meet at the poles. I believe latitude run parallel to one another, if I remember. But anyway, this is called a pole vertex, or pole, just meaning that it has a bunch of triangles that meet in one spot. Ideally, we want to try to avoid this as much as possible, mostly because if we transfer any of our objects into programs like Mudbox, Autodesk Mudbox, it doesn't like these type of shapes. So we want to stick to what's known as clean or nice topology, which is all the polygons kind of run nice and smoothly together. And they create a nice grid. Let's see here. So getting back to Polygon mode, we can select our polygons here. If I double click, nothing ends up happening there. I'm going to come back to all these tools, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of what these are. Okay, last is element. So if I select element, I'm selecting this entire object. I'm not selecting it in the same way that if I, come out of element mode, so I turn that button off. If I click here, I'm in object mode. I call it object mode because that's what Autodesk Maya refers to as this mode, and I feel like it just makes sense to call it the same thing. So we're in object mode right now. These are sub-object types. Anything that you see underneath here is a sub-object. So this is a sub-object selection type called element. So let's say I have a box, and let's say I create a teapot. Let's go with teapot. And I create a teapot right next to the box. These are both individual objects. So in object mode, or normal selection type, I can select these two objects. They are individual objects. You can see one here is named box 001, the other is named teapot 001. If I select box, which is an editable polygon, and I'm in modify right now, if I select the teapot, you can see it has the teapot parameter, so I can add more segments and what have you, or I can change the radius of the teapot. But you can see I also have an attach feature here. If I select this object, notice now that teapot is gone. It has become part of our object. So I'm going to turn attach back off, and now you'll see that when I select the box, it selects the teapot. In element mode, I can select the box, I can select the parts of the teapot, which are the elements of the teapot. So in this case, our teapot has a handle, it has the bowl, it has the lid, and it has the spout. These are all elements that make up the teapot. They are all parts of the teapot. But in this case, I've attached these two objects together, so they're now one object, but they are individual elements that make up. Now these individual elements are made up and they're able to be selected because they're not welded to the rest of the mesh, meaning they're not connected directly. They don't share the same vertices and edges. So there's that. But I'm going to delete the box element and just stick with the teapot here. So I'm going to select all these and just move this back over. So now something I can see is I can see that this teapot has these different elements, but now if I go to border, I can actually select these edges here. And let me explain why we can do that. These are border edges. Border edges are edges that surround holes in our mesh. If I hit Control A, oops, sorry, let me go back to border mode. If I hit Control A, I'm going to see, I'm going to go in the wireframe here, these red edges all light up, letting me know that these are holes in our mesh. Now, right now, if I look at this object, so I just hit F3 to go back into shaded view here. If I look at this, I can see the inside and it doesn't look like it has a hole. Well, that's because all these objects have what's called a normal face, which is the face that we see here, and it has a back face, which is what we see here. Notice how it's slightly darker in appearance, or just to give you a better idea here, so you can see them kind of side by side. This one is darker. That's known as the back face. What's important about that is if I hit render, notice the teapot on the inside doesn't render. It's just black. It's showing the background through it. Same idea with the lid. If I render this, whoops, render, the bottom part of the lid doesn't render. So that's very important. What that means to us is that this object is only one-sided. These back faces here don't render. They're not drawn by our camera at render time. So I'm going to turn that off for a second. I'm going to right click, go to Object Properties, and I'm going to say Backface Cull. Backface Cull means do not draw, so that's what the word cull means, the back face. So I'm going to check that and say OK. Now we can see that our other side here disappears, and that means that there's a hole in our mesh, and I can select that using border. Okay, so that's what border does. Really useful for that. So some of the things that we can do with our objects here when we're editing is we can select vertices and move them around to distort the mesh, but we can also extrude. So I'm going to go through each one of these selection types, and I'm going to show you the things that I believe are the most valuable parts that make up each one of these categories or each one of these selections. So if I leave something out, it's not because it's not useful. It's that in the 15 years that I've used 3D Studio Max, there are tools that I rarely use. So I'm going to focus on the ones that a beginner could kind of use and focus on, because this is kind of a beginner course. So under vertex, the one thing I have is ignore backfacing. This becomes really handy. Let's say if I do a window selection here by clicking and dragging, and I select these vertices. When ignore backface is on, I don't select the other side of the mesh here. If I turn this off and I do a selection here, just trying to select these three, notice how some of the vertices on this side got selected. So ignore backface, that's what it does. Shrink and grow, all of these selection types use shrink and grow. If I'm in vertex mode and I select this one vertex, and I click grow, it selects the ones adjacent to it. If I hit grow again, it expands it even more. If I hit shrink, it goes back. Same idea with edge mode. If I select this edge and I say grow, it selects the ones that are touching that edge. Border's not really going to do it. If I'm in Polygon mode and I click grow, there you go. So it selects all the ones there. And element, it doesn't, I can grow the selection, but I'm actually growing the polygon selection, not an element selection. So it's kind of useless here. But some of the other things that we share, or that we can do with this is, let's say I select these polygons, but I want to select the vertices associated with these specific polygons. I can hold Control and click Vertex, and I'll select the vertices associated with those polygons. So I'm kind of converting by doing that. So I'm holding Control. If I hold Control and I click Edge now, you can see I select any edges that are connected to those vertices. And if I hold Control and go back to Polygon, I'll select all the polygons that were associated with those edges. So we can convert our selection types by holding Control and clicking these. If I only click Vertex now without holding Control, well, it goes back to what I originally had selected here. So if I selected this edge and I go to Vertex without Control, it's still selecting what I originally had there. So just so you know that. This drop down that we have for soft selection is really handy. So soft selection is good for, I can select one vertex here, and now as I move, the rest of the cup that is colored here distorts with it. The way this works is, notice how when I have this vertex selected here, it's bright red. When I turn on soft selection, let's pretend like this is hot, right? So this is red, and as the colors get cooler, our selection falls off. It gets, that's our fall off here. So it doesn't have as much strength as when I'm pulling from here. So the whole thing kind of moves from this point. If I turn the fall off up, I'll select more of it. So that's what soft selection is good for. But notice how I had said before, if I turn this off, that this is an element. So if I pull this off, you can see they're not really connected. They don't have any vertices that are welded to the rest of this mesh, and that's fine. But if I'm in soft select mode and I select just this vertex here, maybe I don't want to affect these other objects around it. I just want to affect just the handle. So the way I can do that is turn on edge distance. And now I can say only affect edges away from here. So if I turn this value up, even if I turn it up really, really high, I'm not going to select any of this because it's not connected by edges. So I'm going to set this to I don't know, let's say 7. Now I'll change my fall off, and I'm only affecting the handle, which is helpful. I have two settings here. So I have pinch and bubble. And so if I select this vertex, I'm going to turn edge distance off just so we can see this. The way this fall off works, and actually this might be a little easier to show you on a plane. So I'm just going to make a quick plane. I'm going to hit G to turn off my grid. And I'm going to add a lot of segments here. So 50 something. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to convert that object to an editable polygon, and I'm going to turn on soft selection. So I'm just going to select somewhere in the center here, and we can see as I pull this up, the fall off that's here resembles this image here. So it has this ease in and ease out curve that's nice and smooth. If I change pinch, it's going to affect the peak here of this curve. So if I set it to 1, close to 1, now when I pull this up, you can see it comes to a point. If I were to set it to something weird, like -1, you see how it's got this like dip in it, and when I pull this up, from this view it doesn't really look like much. But you can see here it actually has that dip. It's just doing it three-dimensional here. So normally I'll have this at 0 to 1, somewhere in between there. That's where I kind of limit that to. Bubble will affect the bottom parts here, or the outer part of the curve. So if I change this one to 1, you can see now, as I pull this up, it becomes rounder and flatter there. If I make this one 1 again, you can kind of see what we're creating there. Looks just like this. So that's soft selection, that's how it's used. Very helpful though. Okay. One of the other things that's really nice is if we come back here, I'm just going to delete the plane for now. Let's say we wanted this lid to actually be connected here. Let me turn off soft selection. And I'm going to just drag this down. So we can use some welding tools to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to border mode. I'm going to select this border edge. Remember, the border edge is selecting a hole in our mesh. I'm going to hold Control, and I'm going to click this border edge. Now I'm going to hold Control and click Vertex, and it's going to select the vertices associated with those border edges. So now I'm going to go to Weld, and I'm going to click the settings next to Weld, which will bring up this little dialog. So here we have our weld threshold. So remember before I told you that this is 10 units. This defaults to 0.1. None of these vertices are within this tolerance. This is 0.1 distance from one another. So if I click and drag this, I can bring it up to 1 point something, and now we can see these weld together. I'm going to hit X just to not do that for now, just so I can show you again. And it welds those together. I'm going to hit check to finish this off. Now if I go into element mode, we see that this is now one element because it's been welded together. So that's important. The other way we can kind of weld things together, besides using weld and already selecting things, is I could say weld this vertex to this vertex. So what I could do is select this one. I'm going to use target weld. And right now it actually doesn't matter if that's selected because I can work from here. So just to show you, I can select one. And notice how I'm going to call it crosshairs, my cursor here kind of changes to this crosshairs, this target. When I'm over top of this, that means that it's able to be selected. So I select that and I get this dotted line. Hopefully you can see that. This dotted line means that, hey, I'm looking for something. I want to go to somewhere else. Please click something else. So I'm going to click the one here, and now the vertex that was here is now welded here. So these are now welded. They're one vertex. Undo back here. Uh-oh. For a second there I thought Max was going to crash. That'd be bad. So that's target weld. But the way target weld works is it won't allow me to weld here. See how my cursor doesn't change? Because there's not an edge that connects these two. There's actually a big polygon in the way across here, so it won't allow me to. You can see it won't allow me to any of those. It'll allow me to do it to the adjacent ones, but not the other ones. So I could do that by just deleting this polygon, so I could select it and delete it, go back to vertex, and now if I go to target weld, there's no polygon in the way here, so it will now weld. I'm just undoing back. So that's how target weld works. Moving a little bit down further here, we have some constraints. These constraints are nice if you want to maintain a specific shape of something here. So you can see how this teapot has this curve here to it. Right now if I go to edge mode, I'm just going to select all the edges around there. Control, click vertex to now change our selection to vertex mode. So right now if I move this, you can see I can move these basically anywhere I want along the X, the Y, and the Z. But let's say I want to constrain the movements here. And I'm going to show constrain edge because that's the one I find to be the best out of these these three options. So now if I move, notice how it stays and tries to keep the shape of the object that it's moving from, because these vertices are now constrained to only move along the edges that are around it. And if I try to drag them up further, nothing happens. It won't allow me to because they're constrained. The ones for face allows us to move them along the faces that are here. And I don't really like using that. And the one for normal allows me to only move it in the direction that the polygons are facing based on the normals of the polygons around it, the direction they're facing. So I can move it out and in only. That one's not too bad, but mainly I stick to edge or none. Most of the time I'll work in none and edge only when I want to keep a specific shape, like this. So that's constrain. Collapse. Collapse can be good. Let's say I wanted to not have a hole here. I can go to border mode and I can actually select collapse from here. You can do it from edge mode as well and from vertex. So I'm just going to hit control and click vertex to select those, and I'm going to say collapse. So what it does is it basically takes all those vertices and pulls them all together, and it kind of closes up that hole. What it leaves me though is this pull vertex. This is actually very easy to remove. I can do that with the remove tool here, but I'm going to do it in edge mode instead. So I'm going to go to edge, I'm going to select this edge, I'm going to say remove, and now I have a four-sided polygon. And it works very nicely in that case, remove. But let's say I wanted to let's say I wanted this spout to be a perfectly straight line, and I didn't want to have these edge loops here. So I'm going to double click them. I'm going to say remove, but you're going to notice something happens. It didn't change the shape. It got rid of the edges, but it still looks the same. That's because it removed the edges. It did not, however, remove the vertices. So that's kind of an issue. The reason that's an issue is now these are multi-sided polygons called n-gons, which are kind of yucky and we don't want to use those. N-gons just means that it has more than 4 sides. I'm going to hit Control Z. I'm going to go back to edge mode, and this time when I click remove, I'm going to hold Control, and when I do that, notice how they're gone, and obviously the vertex or the vertices are also gone. So that's remove. You can select the one here, Control, remove that. Now I've got a perfectly straight spout. It's kind of weird, but you do the same idea here. So double click these, Control, remove, and that's kind of weird, but just to give you an idea of how that kind of works. So don't get into a habit of just removing things just to remove them. It's really better for taking high poly meshes that we've created and making low poly versions of them by removing. You just got to be very smart about what you're removing and why. Something we don't want to do is just select this and Control, remove, and go, yeah, there we go, looks better. It's got a big giant n-gon in the middle here. So it's a polygon that has 8 edges. We don't want that. So what we had before is better. Okay. Let's see if I'm done with everything that I want to show in Vertex. Attach is going to be in all of them. That's just what I use to attach multiple objects together. I'm going to actually skip Slice Plane because it can have a lot of bad applications, and there's actually an option that I'll show you at the end that's a little bit better for slicing. Let me show you what it is, just so you can see. The Slice Plane will allow me to use this plane to bisect our mesh here, and you can see it's going all the way through all the pieces, which may not be what you want. To do it, you just end up clicking Slice, and now it will keep these edge loops that it's basically creating. But where you can get into trouble is if you do something like this, where let's say I just rotate this, and there, yeah, I'll slice that. That looks great, doesn't it? Just have this big slash going through here. That's actually bad, so it's creating a lot of triangles and 5-sided polygons, and we don't want that. So I'll show you what we can do instead of that. Mesh Smooth, there's a modifier called Mesh Smooth. I don't recommend you use that modifier. There's a Turbo Smooth one that works better. This is a useless button, mostly, if you're trying to keep good topology. Tessellate we'll typically use that in Polygon Mode, so don't necessarily need to use it here. Make Planar allows us to, planar just means make flat. So let's say we wanted the very top of this, instead of being rounded, I could select all these vertices on top, and our Z direction, if we look here, this is our Z direction. If I click Z, it makes that flat. Could do the same idea if I took this whole row of polygons and I say make planar Z, so you can see it's made it flat there. We can also make planar in the X and the Y direction. Another nice option here is the Relax tool. There's actually a modifier called Relax, and if I just apply that modifier real quick, it basically tries to smooth everything out and organize the polygons. So you can see if I turn it way up, I can just kind of smooth this thing out to almost nothing. I'm going to take that off. Where this comes in really handy is, let's say I've got some polygons here that are just kind of weird, like this. So the natural flow of these edge loops here isn't nice and smooth, and I've got these weird jags going on here. So I could select these polygons and go to my Relax tool, Settings, and it's going to do its best to try to smooth this out. Now it's also going to flatten this, but it's going to try to organize these better. So it relaxes our topology. Okay. Hide selected just simply means that if we select some vertices here and I click hide selected, it hides them from view so I can't select them. This is useful if you're working on an area and you don't want to accidentally mess it up. You can hide the selected vertices. And then you can simply do unhide all. That's as far as I'm going to cover in Vertex. And some of these are going to be redundant. So shrink, grow, loop we already kind of covered. Remove we've covered. Chamfer is a pretty decent tool depending on what you're doing with it. If I select the edge loop here and I chamfer, it's going to take the one edge that I have and allow me to chamfer it, which is to split it apart, and it's also going to round this out a little bit. I can add in more segments in here, so if I wanted to create like a filleted edge, I could do that. I'm just going to hit X on that. Or if I wanted this edge to be rounder, so I could chamfer this and add in segments here to kind of round that out more. I can also, when I'm chamfering, say chamfer open, which will remove the polygons in between. This is good if you wanted to separate two objects. Perfect example would be, let's say I don't want the lid and the bowl section of our teapot to be connected. I can double click to select the edges around there. I can say chamfer. I have this checked now, and I can separate these apart. And I hit check, and now they're separate elements again because there's a hole. You can see that by selecting the border edges here. Let's see here. The bridge tool is really nice. So bridge allows us to select one edge, and I can select another edge. And if I click bridge, it will create a polygon connecting the two together, like a bridge would. Same idea. Let's say I deleted some polygons here on accident, didn't realize it. Something I could do to fix that is select the two edges on this side and the two on this side, and I can go to the bridge settings. Now in this case I don't have enough polygons across this bridge to attach here, so I can add segments, so one, and now I've got edges. And I just hit the plus button to finish out the tool there. I kind of move this out a little bit just to kind of round that back out. Pull this out a little bit more. And now if I want to close these up, this is where Target Weld comes in. Go back to Vertex, Target Weld, click my first vertex and where I want it to be welded. There we go. And I fixed that hole. And that's what bridge does. So bridge is a really nice tool. Kind of have some of the same tools down here that we've already talked about. Border. So border has a cap feature. So if I delete these and I go to the border edge, besides just selecting holes, I can select this hole and I can say cap, and it's going to create a polygon that caps this hole. It is an n-gon though, so it's a 8-sided polygon. If I come to Polygon Mode, I can fix this by using the cut tool. And so the cut tool works this way. If the cursor goes over a vertex, it turns into a small crosshair. If it's over an edge, it's like a wide crosshair. If it's over a polygon, it looks like a box. So this lets me know what I'm over top of. So something I can do here is I can click my first vertex here and the one here and create a polygon there. I'm going to right click to stop cutting. I'm going to come to the one up here and come down here and click again to create another one. Be careful with this. If done the wrong way, I could accidentally select not right here and create some really bad looking polygons like this. I don't want to do that. So use cut wisely. Use it to make four-sided shapes, or three if you're really desperate on shapes. So with border mode, like I said, I normally use it to select or find holes, and I can use it to cap, and I end up having to fix those caps once I've done that. Okay, Polygon Mode. So Polygon Mode, the things that you're going to be using most here are under Edit Polygons, and that's going to be Extrude, Bevel, and Inset. So Extrude, if I select a group of polygons here, so I'm just going to select around here. If I use Extrude, and I'm going to use the settings, it will extrude out brand new polygons. And I can change the height parameter here. I can also make it a negative number to go inward. If I hit plus, it's going to extrude and then extrude again. If I just hit the check mark, it'll extrude and finish that. Under extrude, we're currently under the type group, so you can see everything is trying to extrude out in the same direction. Next to underneath this, I have local normal, which now they all try to extrude in the direction those polygons are pointing, so they fan out. And then the last one is by polygon. Each one extrudes individually by polygon. While I'm in this mode and I'm in settings, I can hold Control and continue to select polygons. So just be careful of that. And if you're unsure, just hit X and then select whatever it is you want to select. Outline allows us to, it's kind of a weird tool and I don't really use it much. It's kind of like scale, but it scales the polygons in the direction their edges are kind of facing. It makes more sense if we look at Bevel, which has an outline setting. If I highlight here, you can see this will say outline. And so I have a height, just like with Extrude. I also can drop this down to local normal if I want these all to come out in their own direction. But I can change the outline setting. So if I want to bevel this kind of downward and get smaller as it's extruded, this is where bevel comes in handy. So I'm going to hit X there. Next, I have inset. Oh, and we can also bevel by polygon. So if I select a bunch of these, I can do by polygon and do them individually. This could be handy if you wanted to try to create something like I don't know, a handle or something on something that has little ridges that you can kind of hold on to, or spikes on a mace or something like that. We also have inset. So if I use the inset settings, it's going to not so much extrude, but it's going to inset is what it's doing, but it's like extruding with no height. So it's like bevel if bevel didn't have height. So if I turn on bevel, and I say by group, and I turn height all the way to 0, that's what it's doing. The difference is bevel allows us to give height and to scale in, whereas inset just creates the new polygons inwardly. You can also do this by polygon, so just like this. If I had a window on a house, I might use inset and extrude to create my window. So that's something you can do with it. More than likely what I would do is extrude out slightly by local normal to give me like the frame of my windowsill. I'll hit check. We use inset to inset by polygon to create where the windows are, and then extrude again negative to create the window panes. And so that makes it look like I've got a little window there. So that's how you can use these tools together. If you want to see these tools used a lot more, go to my How to Box Model a Hand tutorial, and it'll really show what these tools are good for. Let's see. Yeah, I think that basically covers what I wanted to show in this video and how to use these. Oh, I did say I had one other thing to show, which is the modeling tools here in what's referred to as the graphite modeling ribbon. So if I drop this down to show the full ribbon, I'm going to see these graphite modeling tools. And they work very similarly to what we see here. By the way, your Macs may end up looking like this. I just drag mine out so I can see more at one time. So I'm going to delete this object. I'm going to create a plane, let's just say. And I'm going to give this, let me change the color so we can see the wireframe really good. I'm going to give this 1 by 1 segments. So I'm going to convert this to Editable Poly. But let's say, oh man, I really needed to have a specific polygon somewhere. The tool I want you to see, instead of using Slice, is Swift Loop. So it's under Modeling, Swift Loop. When I turn that on, it'll turn blue. And now you can see if I'm close to this edge, it's going to draw a segment perpendicular to this. If I come to this edge, it tries to draw a segment perpendicular to this. So what I can do is, I can easily just start laying out specific polygons. So if I wanted to create something like that, I can go into Polygon Mode now and like extrude this out. And if I wanted another segment to wrap all the way around here, I'll turn this off and go to Swift Loop, and I'm just adding in segments here just so you can kind of see. And these are going to wrap all the way around the object if your topology is set up for that. And by what I just did, it is currently set up. Notice it is a little bit finicky on how it works, so you just gotta have patience with it. So I can add in these segments. In Polygon Mode, if I hold Shift, I can select all the polygons that go around those edge loops. I'm going to use Extrude by Local Normal. So I could extrude these all out together around the object doing that. Or I can select all the ones around and extrude inward with Local Normal. So just to give you an idea of some things we can do with Swift Loop. Alright, so that concludes this tutorial. Please like, comment, share this video. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. I try to post many tutorials, and I try to post them based on user requests that I get either from my students or from those that are subscribing. So leave a comment and say, hey, I'd like to see this done, or how would you approach this, and I'll do a video on it as long as I have time to do that. If it's something to where I can just reply back, I'll do that in that case. But yeah, so thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.